the fifth installment of the Grandmaster's Q&A. This evening, I'll just give you a brief synopsis of our agenda. I'm going to introduce the Grandmaster in a couple of minutes, and he's going to talk to us regarding an update and a status of our re-entry plan. And then we're going to hear from our Right Worshipful Grand Education Officer, I apologize, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the Grand Education Officer events that are coming up. And then our Right Worshipful Grand Lecturer is going to talk about his plans for the year. And then we're going to hear from our Deputy Grandmaster regarding our social media policy and an important update to that policy. And then we're going to hear a historical perspective on pandemics, past and present in New Hampshire Masonry, from our Right Worshipful historian, Right Worshipful Brother Carl Olson. So now, without further ado, brother, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you the most worshipful Grand Master of the most worshipful Grand Lodge of the ancient and honorable fraternity of free and accepted Masons of the state of New Hampshire, most worshipful brother, Kenneth Ansel Clay, Jr. Most worshipful.
Well, thank you, Right Worshipful. I appreciate that introduction. Fine job. And thank you once again for managing the flow of this Q&A session. I want to welcome everyone that's joined us here this evening. I hope you're all staying safe and that you're enjoying our summer season. Just a very quick update on where we stand with the rollout plan. As you all know, we made an announcement a few weeks ago, and as of June 15th, we entered what I refer to as phase 1, where lodges are enabled, if you believe it's the right thing to do in your region, to once again have face-to-face, stated and special communications. I know a number of lodges have taken advantage of the fact that technologies such as Zoom and GoToMeeting and whatnot, they are doing a bit of a hybrid approach. My own lodge did this, where the ritual is done in a face-to-face manner. Once the ritual is completed, the lodge is put at rest, and then the online platform is turned on, and there's usually a program of a Masonic sort, a little bit of discussion. Then that session is then disabled, and the lodge is put back at work to conduct any remaining business, and then is closed in the usual Masonic manner. I know a number of lodges that have done this. It's been quite successful, and I am just so pleased, brethren, that we're finally able to get back together face-to-face once again. I would also encourage lodges who perhaps would normally go dark over the summer to seriously consider a special communication over those summer months to give your brethren an opportunity for nothing more than simply networking. All you need to do is to put out proper notice and indicate in that notice that the purpose of your special communication is simply to get together as brethren to share in your brotherhood. Now, that was followed up on June 19th with what I refer to as phase 1A. Phase 1A was where we announced the procedure that lodges can use to execute your inspections and to hold degree rehearsals. And what you're going to hear tonight from Right Worshipful Brother Busby is that phase 1A is extended even further with some guidance on how to handle visitations. Now, next month, mid-July, I will be announcing phase 1B, which is food and collations. Brethren, what really was striking to me when I went to my own lodge is that we all know that what takes place within the lodge itself is a wonderful thing. But before and after the lodge is every bit as important. I think it's very important that we find a way to offer the brethren a chance to share in collations. So I'll be making an announcement in mid-July associated with that. And then in the very early part of August, I'll be making an announcement regarding phase 2, and that is allowing lodges to again begin performing degrees. My intent here, working with Right Worshipful Brother Busby, is to ensure that lodges have quite a backlog of candidates that have been patiently waiting. We want the lodges to get to work to start getting that done. So you're now enabled to do rehearsals. I would encourage you to start that process so that in August, you should be able to start degrees. And then sometime after that, I'll be then making an announcement with regard to phase 3, where special events such as veterans and special ladies programs can be held. So brethren, I am absolutely thrilled that we've entered phase 1. We all know that throughout the country, there are some problems with this virus not wanting to go away. We've been very fortunate here in New Hampshire that so far things are continuing on a good trend. Obviously, any announcements that I make are contingent upon that path continuing. We always have to adhere to the regulations of our local, state, and federal authorities. So any announcement that I will make will be in guidance to what we hear from our government leaders. So things can change depending on the status of the pandemic, but as of right now, that's where my plan leads us. I'm absolutely thrilled with the fact that we're able to get back together once again. Brethren, thanks once again for tuning in tonight. I'm now going to turn the program back over to Right Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss, who will introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Most Worshipful. Appreciate those words of wisdom and a summary of where we currently stand. And I do not see any questions for you at this time, but if any come up, we'll certainly pass them along to you. Now, brethren, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you our Grand Education Officer, Right Worshipful Brother Dave Akridge, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the plans that the Education Committee has and some of the upcoming events they have planned. Right Worshipful.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Hotchkiss. And Most Worshipful Clay, thank you for your leadership during these times and your unwavering support of your pillar of Masonic education. Good evening, brethren. As we emerge in a phased reopening of in-person Masonic gatherings, I want to take a moment to thank the many DDGOs, Masters of Lodge, Lodge education leaders, who, when faced with adversity, rose to the occasion and morphed to an online offering. From the candidate awaiting initiation to the seasoned Master Mason, I think that we've been able to capture all who chose to avail themselves of the online offerings. As we transition pursuant to the Grand Master's guidance, expect to see a blend of virtual and in-person offerings of Masonic education as we move forward this summer. Your Masonic Education Committee is dedicated to providing you with the Masonic education you need and that you want, from assistance in developing a lodge education officer, utilization of your district deputy, your education officer, Right Worshipful Malcolm Wolf or myself, and finally, perhaps an offering from our Speakers Bureau. Now, if you haven't heard about the Speakers Bureau, go to our website, For Masons, and you will see Speakers Bureau. You have almost 50 topics from, the Grand Master through the Grand Line, through the DDGOs, many competent Masonic education speakers on various topics that you can bring to your lodge. So I guess my point is, if you want Masonic education to be a part of your lodge, all you have to do is ask. There are many resources there. Tonight, I am very pleased to announce that we will be hosting a Master Mason seminar on Saturday, August the 1st at Horace Chase Lodge from 9 to 3:30. This offering is an in-person offering and is open to Master Masons only. Coffee, donuts, and lunch will all be provided. To be included, just email me at geo@nhgrandlodge.org and remit a payment of $25 payable to the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire and sent to our Grand Lodge address. However, for those Master Masons who have been raised in the last year, it is free. So I strongly encourage our new Master Masons to attend. want to talk a little bit about what the topics are. As always, it is a participative forum, but we'll talk about the history of Freemasonry, where did it begin, and how it's kind of evolved in the state of New Hampshire, how the system of Freemasonry functions and what it means to you, how the ritual developed in New Hampshire, lodge protocol and etiquette, understanding how to conduct yourself at a lodge meeting. And I think very importantly, what is Grand Lodge and how it relates to the Master Mason in his own lodge. And again, this is a participative format. I trust that you will, the early response has been great. I hope to see you there, and I'm pleased with the early interest that we've seen. And I think that the other thing that we hope to roll out in October is we've done an EA workshop. We have a Master Mason seminar, and it is our hope to bring you a Fellowcraft workshop sometime in October, the date to be determined. And finally, you have our commitment that if you invest your time, we will provide an investment on that time. Thank you, brethren, and it's back to you, Right Worshipful Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Akridge, and thank you for your dedication and those programs that you sponsor as part of the education committee. Brethren, I can tell you from personal experience that if you had not attended one of those seminars, that the education committee does a fabulous job, and I learn something new every time I go, despite the fact that I've been a Mason for over 30 years. So I appreciate all your efforts. Thank you, Right Worshipful. And now, brother, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you our grand lecturer, Right Worshipful Brother Chris Busby. Right Worshipful.
Right Worshipful, thank you for the introduction. Brethren, good evening. First, I want to thank our Grand Master for giving me the tremendous opportunity of being your Grand Lecturer. Want to talk a little bit about my personal philosophy and talk about some of the plans that we have in place for the coming year, and we hope that you'll be excited to hear about them. A little bit about my philosophy. I believe that ritual is the absolute heart and soul of our craft, and without it, we would simply be another social or charitable club. Our ritual sets us apart. It binds us with each other and with every Mason throughout time. Through contemplation and performance of our ritual, we learn and grow as Masons and receive further light in Masonry. Our new brothers are owed the most meaningful and spiritually moving experience possible. The DDGLs, the Deputy Grand Lecturer, and I have several very exciting initiatives in the works to provide lodges and brothers some additional tools to assist in the pursuit of ritual excellence. Our goal is to create fresh excitement around learning and performing our beautiful degrees. I've met with all 8 DDGLs and our Deputy Grand Lecturer multiple times in the last few months, both as a group and individually. And I'm very lucky because I could not ask for a better group of brothers to work with. Carrying on the legacy of our predecessor, Right Worshipful Mike Salisbury, who I just saw was on tonight. Hello, Mike. We're going to be focusing on many of our efforts on going beyond the memorization of the words. So starting in September, mid-September, myself and our resident thespian, Brother Michael T. Brown of King Solomon's Lodge number 14, will be conducting a ritual performance workshop. This is Acting 101 for Masonry. We'll be focusing on areas such as the use of movement, facial expressions, vocal delivery, and a lot more. This will be a highly interactive workshop and be very engaging. We'll be using specific ritual and exercises to build the skill with the goal of strengthening the emotional impact of our teachings. There'll be 4 dates scheduled across the jurisdiction from September through December, and we hope those dates will be going to be coming out here within the next week or 2. Next, we have a committee in place currently drafting a series of recommendations for lodge ritual education to assist in engaging officers and your sideline brothers in learning the ritual. Included in this document will be suggested retail parts to learn at each point of an officer's journey, as well as ideas on how to effectively split up larger parts of ritual, like the degree histories. Also, in just under 2 weeks, we'll be reviewing our Ritual Excellence Award program, which will include a rework on how the ritual is categorized and scored, a new name for the award, and more. We'll also be providing opportunities to brothers to earn points toward the award in new and unexpected ways. More information will be available in the fall, including details on the revised program. The dates to participate will be forthcoming in the next few weeks. Brethren, we're also going to be seeing more in the way of connection between Masonic education and ritual. And with our previous speaker, Right Worshipful David Akridge, I will not only be developing a joint educational program on the nature and purpose of our ritual, but you will see an increased collaboration between our DDGLs and our district deputy grand education officers. Finally, brethren, the Grand Masters asked me to speak about the ritual portion of Visitations for 2020. Any lodge that has the resources to conduct ritual as a part of their DDGM visitation may certainly do so, utilizing the guidelines that I set forth on June 15th. However, if your lodge has officers that are not yet comfortable with returning to lodge or performing ritual due to COVID-19, you may opt to have the DDGL and DDGEO do a combined ritual education program. Obviously, the health and well-being of our brothers is our highest priority, and we wish to assure that no brother sacrifices either. So, brethren, if you have any questions or need any assistance, feel free to contact your district deputy grand lecturer, Right Worshipful Dennis Tuttle Sr., our deputy grand lecturer, or myself at grandlecturer@nhgrandlodge.org. Thank you, brethren.
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Appreciate the summary of where you stand and how you're going to approach things and what things you have coming up.
I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. And now, brother, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you our deputy, your deputy Grand Master, Right Worshipful Brother David Collins. Right Worshipful?
Hey, Right Worshipful Hotchkiss. Good evening, brethren, and I hope you're all doing well this evening. In particular, tonight, I wanted to first start out with a comment which relates to what I'm going to talk about with social media. This is a shirt I've had for many years, and many of you are familiar with it. I'm going to turn the camera down, and you've probably seen this with proud to be a New Hampshire Freemason, right? So we wear this something. This is something I certainly wear proudly, brethren. More of I wear it at Masonic meetings, but many of you may wear a Masonic ring, may have a Masonic emblem on your car, may post in social media forums and other forums. Let people know that you're a Freemason and that you're proud to be a Freemason. And it's certainly something that's very important to us, and each of our brethren take it at various levels. So what in particular want to talk to you about, brethren, is social media. So, brethren, I want to relate to you a story. Sometimes when we find ourselves with somebody bringing up a controversial subject, and you may have found yourself person to person, where somebody brought something up that you directly did not agree with, and you felt that that was inappropriate. So at the moment, you may have said something to that, or maybe if somebody wrote something, you may have said something to that. But oftentimes we pause and think about that. The challenge sometimes, brethren, is we have this wonderful thing called social media, Facebook, where we go out and promote ourselves, and our friends and family and people who don't know anything about Freemasonry see who and what we are. We've been doing this for a long time, brethren. And I had the privilege back when I started in the Grand Lodge line, when Most Worshipful past Grand Master Paul Leary was then Grand Master, and he started seeing a lot of social media posts. And he was not concerned about the good things that were happening. What he was concerned about, brethren, is how all of the 100 good things that happen, one poor thing or bad comment on it could really turn people that know nothing about Freemasonry kind of opposed to us. So the Grand Master at that time put together a Grand Lodge social media policy. And since 2011, 2012, this policy has been in place. It has been widely distributed among Masons in New Hampshire. And as well, it's been on the Grand Lodge website for many years. If you go on the Grand Lodge website, nhgrandlodge.org, under the For Masons Only tab, you will find the Grand Lodge social media policy. And it's a relatively simple policy, brethren. A lot of it talks about things like ritual postings. Certainly, brethren, what we do behind closed doors ritualistically in our lodges are private meetings, and those should not be posted certainly out and about. The other thing we talk about is about discussions about private discussions in the lodge, things about balloting, things about candidates, kind of those obvious things, brethren, that you probably would look at and not really think twice about because you're not going to post about. What I really want to talk about, brethren, is this. So again, I go back to my shirt that I'm wearing that says proud to be a New Hampshire Freemason. Now, brethren, there's not a lot of opportunities we have that people in the public, or as we call the profane, those who are not aware of our organization, get a chance to see us. One of, to me, the proudest times I do is I had last week where there was a brother who passed away and I was able to attend his Masonic service. And, afterwards, I spoke to an individual afterwards that said, wow, what a wonderful organization. That was a very moving service that you did. That's an opportunity, brethren, that we take to show the great and wonderful things that we do in this fraternity. But brethren, I'm going to tell you something that happens every day. I'm on Facebook. I look at Facebook on a daily basis. And brethren, as you all are aware, in today's society in the United States, we certainly have a lot of discussions about things that are very extreme one to the other. And I'm sure for all of you, there's upsetting things that happen. But brethren, I need to remind you of something very strongly is, again, I respect the right to your opinion. The Grand Master respects the right to your opinion. Most certainly you have the right to your opinion. But understand, my brothers, that if you have friends out there that you post all the time about going to Masonic meetings and degrees and about how wonderful an organization we are, and then they see you post something that is very disparaging towards an individual or a group of people, and that is not what we are, those people would make the assumption that, I guess that's what Freemasons are. Freemasons are basically a group that is certainly leans to that way. So, brother, what I'm asking you is, I'm not asking you to still continue your independent thought. I know the Grand Master is not. What I'm asking you, brethren, is to consider every time you post. And remember this. It's easy for me to say something to an individual if I disagree with them. It might be broadcast in secondhand conversation. But when you post something, especially on social media, in print, it is there permanently. You can go back and delete the post, but people see those posts. And the problem is you're reflecting on what a great and wonderful organization Freemasonry is on something that really might be simply your personal opinion. So keep in mind, that's the reason that there's a social media policy, because brethren, what it's intended to do is it's intended to essentially shed a good light on Freemasonry, let the world know how open and open-minded an organization we are, respecting people of different faiths, of different creeds, colors, and whatever. And I think that's important, certainly something important that we should think about. And what I want you to do is take a minute while I read this. You can go in and read the social media policy yourself. I encourage you to go in and read it. If you haven't seen it before, for Worshipful Masters, if it's been a while, why don't you bring it up and read through the social media policy at your next state of communication? But most of all, brethren, I want you to take a minute and listen to what I'm going to say in the summary of the social media policy. Ultimately, your actions as Masons on these social media sites should promote the highest standards of morality and integrity. You should always be mindful of the penalties as described in the Grand Constitution relating to trial, suspension, and expulsion for any unmasonic behavior. Posting a comment related to the fraternity and then posting a disparaging comment about a social or political stance can easily be misconstrued by the readers that your stance is representative of Masonry and all Masons. Be mindful that the public and members of the Masonic fraternity are reading your posts on social media. So again, brethren, just be mindful of your posts. Think about those things before you state them, because I'm going to tell you, brother, I've had some well-respected brethren out there that I think well of, and some of their posts recently, it's been a little discouraging to see that they are that thinking in that one direction. Another thing, brethren. So one thing that's come up, and it's been a very good thing, through this whole COVID crisis, we have found ourselves throughout the state in Grand Lodge and Blue Lodges and other Masonic bodies of going to Zoom meetings. Virtual meetings have become a regular thing. For that reason, a lot of districts and lodges have put together private Facebook groups, which are a great thing. Why? Because oftentimes those are discussions or notifications of electronic meetings coming up, Zoom meetings, whatever the case may be, to actually discuss some things about Masonry, and they're open forums. The concern becomes, brethren, and the Grand Master will be putting a revision coming out shortly to the social media policy that will speak about these private Masonic groups. Brethren, first and foremost is this. I think you'll find with the Grand Master is that the private Facebook groups, there's no issue with them, that's fine. However, first and foremost, these are forums that brethren feel comfortable in speaking openly about Masonry. So you should consider these very much like a tiled lodge group. The brethren in these groups and the individuals in these groups should only be Masons in the fraternity of recognized jurisdictions. It should not be spouses of Masons. It should not be friends of Masons. It should only be Masons, because what's happening is, brethren, in these private Facebook groups, the discussions are becoming very much about the Masonic experience, about things that happen in a tiled lodge, and we're just trying to keep those private. Most of the brethren that comment assume it's other brethren in the group. So again, there will be some guidance given, keeping those private Facebook groups private. That's the intent of them, brethren. Not to discourage them. They're extremely useful, and the Grand Master certainly wants to see that continued. It's just the concern of that. So certainly, my brothers, again, don't worry about all of a sudden the Grand Master coming in and shutting down these groups. Just wants to be mindful is that when brethren are in here discussing it, they're doing it in an open forum that they consider a private group, much like really a social gathering of Masons that may be set in the back corner of a restaurant and are chatting about Masonry. Very similar, my brethren. So just please be respectful of that. One final thing I just wanted to note, brethren, on a very good note. First and foremost, brethren, as the Deputy Grand Master, I am charged with leading the charitable efforts of the Grand Lodge in conjunction with the Grand Master. And the Grand Master and I worked together to craft a letter that went out recently in the last couple of weeks to the brethren for our 2020 Grand Lodge Charity Fund Drive. And I want to tell you, brethren, already to date, there has been a tremendous response, probably one of the better ones we've had in many years. Over 5 figures in income has been raised. We're doing very well. I want to continue to ask worshipful masters to bring this up at your lodge meetings from now through later in the fall to make sure those brethren can contribute. Now, brethren, please keep in mind one thing, very important for every brother out there. The Grand Master, myself, when I started this charity drive this year, recognizes the fact that there are some of you out there that have been impacted financially by this whole COVID crisis. For some of you, you might have been furloughed. You might have lost your jobs. You might have a small business that is struggling right now. And to actually give money to a charity fund drive is not within your cable toe. Brethren, please, no issue with that. The Grand Master understands. I most certainly understand. Understand, no need to give. But for those brethren that are able to give, I'm going to encourage you, brethren. I'm going to go back on my theme that I started last year. All I'm asking for, my brothers, sometimes when these charity fund drive letters come out, we think too quickly and think, oh, I'd like to give $50, $100, $200. And you put it aside and it sits in your drawer. And 6 months later, you're like, oh, I didn't give anything. My brother, I want to go back to that theme of $5. If every brother in this jurisdiction gave simply $5, we would have a tremendous increase in the funds that we're able to do to support lodges, to support things like matching funds, to support youth programs, to support programs for the elderly, to support our scholarship programs. Please consider when you get that letter, if you're able to give and you can only give $5, please write out a check and send it in. And my brothers, this year, we're also promoting the fact that if you'd like to do things electronically because it's simple, you can go right on the Grand Lodge website. There's a PayPal account where you can certainly donate whatever you can do. Please, my brothers, do not do this and, providing injury to yourself because you're not able to provide these funds. But if you are, we'd certainly encourage you to give as liberally as you can. And I want to personally thank you on behalf of the Grand Master for supporting the charitable efforts of this Grand Lodge. It's a wonderful thing we do, brethren. And in these more tougher times, I think what support Grand Lodge is able to provide to lodges and brethren in New Hampshire is more critical now than ever. Thank you. Right, Worshipful Brother Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Appreciate that very timely update regarding our social media policy, as well as a nice summary of our charity fund drive. In fact, there is a question from Right Worshipful Brother Akridge, specifically regarding the charity. It says when you go to the various selections, it says that it's designated for general fund. If they want to designate something specifically for COVID relief, can they indicate that in a memo?
They can do that if they choose to. Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
There is on, so the brethren are aware, I just want to be clear, when you go, if you go on PayPal and you go to give electronically on the Grand Lodge website, just understand there are additionally as well certain, there's one that's just the general charity fund drive, which was what I'm talking about. There are also other charities, Grand Lodge charities that we're giving to. And if you'd like to give specifically to those, that's fine. That money will be directed right there. So please, my brothers, whatever way you'd like to give, we appreciate anything you can do to help. Thank you, Right Worshipful.
Thank you, Right Worshipful. Most Worshipful or Right Worshipful Brother Busby, there is a question from Brother Steve Welch. Visitations can start when? Question mark.
Visitations can start anytime after July 1st. We have an inspection procedure in place that can be referenced as a part of the ritualistic portion of a visitation program. So with that being in place, my direction, as was provided to the District Deputy Grand Masters in June, is that once the month of July is here, now that Chris's guidance is in place, lodges may begin visitations.
Thank you, Most Worshipful. And another question that came in a little bit earlier from Brother Brian Ellis about the seminar. Will we need to request the link for this seminar? And Right Worshipful Brother Akridge indicated that emails have gone out and will continue to go out. And I would say, Brother Ellis, if you have not received an email, please email our Right Worshipful Grand Education Officer or email the office, either one, and they'll make sure that you get the appropriate information. If your question involves specifically as to whether or not this would be maybe possibly a virtual event as well as a live event, it's going to be an in-person live event. There are a number of topics within this event that don't necessarily lend themselves to a virtual setting. So we're going to make it an in-person event. And, oh, thank you, Right Worshipful Akridge. Also says that these events will be posted on the Facebook groups in the jurisdiction here within New Hampshire. I currently don't see any other questions. So now, brethren, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Right Worshipful Brother Carl Olson, a Grand Historian, who is going to talk a little bit about the pandemic as it has affected us here in New Hampshire, because this certainly isn't the first pandemic we've experienced, certainly even within the last century or so. So he'll talk a little bit about the historical aspects of how this has affected Masonry in New Hampshire and how it's affected it presently. Right Worshipful.
Thank you, Right Worshipful, and thank you, Most Worshipful, for allowing me the opportunity to talk a little bit about this for a few minutes. Brethren, our organization has obviously been around for centuries, and as Right Worshipful said, we've been through several pandemics, and it is interesting in culling the history of our Grand Lodge, largely through Grand Lodge proceedings, to look at what our actions have been and how we have reacted to some of these pandemics and epidemics over time. So just to step back and do kind of a quick little educational thing so everybody's on the same page, there are three definitions that are used when they talk about they talk about situations like this with illnesses. There is an outbreak, which is a sudden rise, usually in a small geographic area, in a particular illness. Then there's an epidemic, in which a disease spreads quickly and rapidly to many people, but it's not on as large a scale as an epidemic or as a pandemic. An epidemic, for example, if you remember back to 2003, the SARS epidemic took about 800 lives worldwide. That was considered an epidemic because it was a smaller scale. Then there's a pandemic, which is a disease, which is a global outbreak. It differs from an outbreak or an epidemic because it's often a much larger geographic area worldwide, a greater number of people than an epidemic, and it's often caused by a new strain that people do not have any immunity against. and causes much larger numbers of deaths than epidemics do. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, that to qualify as a pandemic, it creates social disruption, economic loss, and general hardship, which I think we can all agree this definitely then qualifies as a pandemic. So there, looking at the history of the 20th century, the pandemic that most people are most familiar with is what was known as the Spanish flu epidemic, or pandemic of 1918, ran through about 1920. Interesting, it was an H1N1, which is the same type of an organism that we're dealing with now. That one actually affected about 500 million people worldwide. And there were 50 million deaths from it, 675,000 in the US alone. And that was one of the first pandemics where we saw masking and social distancing and things like that, because they didn't have the drugs, they didn't have the infection techniques that they have today. So distancing and isolation and things like that were the only means that they had to fight it. It was widely known as the Spanish flu, but it's interesting because it didn't originate in Spain. But because of World War I and the very fluid situation that was going on in Europe with the fighting back and forth, a lot of the wire services, the reporters were reporting out of Madrid. So the news came out over the wire service in Madrid. So everybody went, oh, this is a Spanish thing. But in fact, it wasn't. Now, in looking at our Grand Lodge records for 1918, we had a full LOI season. We had all of the normal activities that you would associate with Grand Lodge. They met as normal. And in fact, for all of these epidemics, the 3 or 4 that I'm going to talk about, there's no evidence that it even happened, according to the records of Grand Lodge. We didn't have a reaction to it. So by the very fact that we have a reaction to it this time with the edicts that have come from our Grand Master and with his guidance as we've gone through this, it shows that we are far more involved with our communities, perhaps more dedicated to our brethren who have been at risk for this particular illness. So it shows us playing a greater role in our community now than maybe we had before. Just a couple of the other pandemics that I wanted to mention for the 20th century was in 1957 and 58, we had another flu that went around. It was the Asian flu. And that one affected, it was 1.1 million deaths worldwide and 116,000 in the United States. In 1968, there was another one, but they think that maybe that one was just sort of a follow-on to the 57-58 illness. The Asian flu was known as the Hong Kong flu. And there were about 1 million deaths worldwide, about 100,000 in the United States. Most of those were people that were 65 or above. And the numbers they think were probably a little bit lower because we had much better infection control techniques and more of a scientific method available by then, antibiotics and that sort of thing. Then the last 2 that I'm going to talk about should be fairly recent memory. 2009, we had the swine flu, which was 60.8 million cases worldwide. There were 274,000 hospitalizations from that. And there were 12,469 deaths in the United States alone. So now, to compare those, I just talked about 60.8 million cases worldwide. COVID-19 right now sits at about 10 million cases worldwide. So in terms of the severity of some of these things, I mean, I talked about 500 million with the Spanish flu 100 years ago. 500,000 deaths worldwide, 125,000 in the United States so far from COVID. Well, remember when I talked about the Spanish flu, I talked about 675,000 dead in the US alone. So that's what, 5, 6 times, I don't know, where are my math teachers, the number of deaths. So, this certainly is something on a global scale. Now, as I've talked about this type of thing before and our reaction to pandemics and that sort of thing, also to world events, it's interesting. The only reference that I found to Grand Lodge actually changing sessions for any particular reason was in World War II. And that was because of travel restrictions, that they limited the number of attendees from each lodge at Grand Lodge to 4. So it was the master, the senior warden, the junior warden, and the Grand Lodge rep. They didn't have other members there simply because they were abiding by the travel regulations that the government had issued as regards World War II. So it is interesting to note that the change to our annual communication this past May, I actually, in going back and looking, found no other reference. I did find one rather interesting reference that was made when the early records of Grand Lodge were compiled, that there are no records from the year 1791. And nobody knows why, whether Grand Lodge simply didn't meet in that second year, or if the notes, the minutes of the meetings were just somehow lost. They couldn't find anything to include. So we know why Grand Lodge didn't meet in 2020 in May, but we're not sure why they didn't meet in 1791. And I don't think we've got anybody old enough to remember that. Although there are a couple out there that may come close. So brethren, as an organization, we have largely focused more on ourselves than we have on the world, and been an organization that's kind of kept to ourselves. So certainly at this time, with everything that's going on because of coronavirus and all of the other things that are going on in the world right now, Freemasonry certainly has a sparkling opportunity to show ourselves to be those leaders of our community, of our world, in a time when people are looking for things that they can believe in, and that moral compass and those role models. It certainly is a great opportunity for us. And what we're going to be when we come out of all of this isolation, shelter at home, stay at home orders, et cetera, is very telling, because this event, in terms of its enormity to the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, is enormous. That this is happening in our lifetimes. The closest thing we can probably compare it to in terms of how it's affected Masonic meetings, when we meet, where we meet, how we meet, is to compare it to the Morgan affair, which was nearly 2 centuries ago. And what was our response to that then? We are now we see that Masonry that came out of the Morgan affair, the Masonry of the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, was one of the strongest times that Masonry had. And we're now in a position to bring Masonry back out of that essentially dark time into a time of light, literally. And, hopefully we can be that light. I do have one more thing that I would like to share just before I wrap up. And to do that, I have a piece that I would like to read. And so I've already mentioned to Brother Busby that I can do this. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to share my screen with everybody. And brethren, I don't have to know things. I don't have to have words. I get to go back and look at the words and read the words of all of these brethren who were so much more eloquent and loquacious than I am. And then I just have to repeat their words. So brethren, these were comments that were made, I found in the proceedings. And it says, in visiting the aforementioned lodges, it has been my endeavor to impress upon the minds of my brethren in order that we may not wear the livery of a Mason in vain, the importance of acquainting ourselves with the nature and design of the institution. also of the moral application of our Masonic implements of labor, and of that useful instruction, and of that useful of instruction. I just finished typing this, I promise. And that useful instruction of our Masonic emblems, that our Masonic emblems are inculcated to teach, ever bearing in mind the moral ties we have laid ourselves under as Masons. And in order that the ancient landmarks of our order be neither removed or defaced, I have recommended that the avenues of admission be guarded with Masonic vigilance, and that after admission, a suspension of the conferring of higher degrees until the candidate has obtained the necessary information on the degree already attained, notwithstanding he has stood his 5 or more months, believing as I do that incapacity or indolence has no just claim to deferment. Brethren, as we talked about our Master Mason seminars, as we talked about our educational programs, as we talked about our ritual excellence programs, these are words that were spoken by Right Worshipful Stephen Wilson, District Deputy Grand Master, in his report to Grand Lodge, the 7th day of June, 1825. So 195 years ago, we had a District Deputy Grand Master who was concerned that brethren be properly taught, properly educated, properly prepared to move on. And he left us with these words, which are far more powerful than anything I could probably come up with. And, you know, these may be words that you might hear again, because they certainly speak to all of those things that we would hope we each have, and that we would hope each of our brothers has. And with that, Grand Master, Right Worshipful Senior Grand Warden, I thank you for the opportunity to address the brethren. Hopefully we know a little bit more about what our Grand Lodge has done during some of these pandemics, and a little bit more thought about where we go next.
Thank you very much, Right Worshipful. It's always nice to hear the historical perspective and what's transpired in the past, so that we may continue to learn from it. Brethren, there was one question before I turn it over to our Grand Master for some closing remarks. Regarding with the start of performing of degrees in early August, is it the Grand Lodge position that Grand Lodge will be performing the degrees, or will the lodges be able to perform their own degrees? Most worshipful, if you'd like to answer that before we close.
My brother, thank you for the question. It is certainly our intent that lodges be able to perform their own degrees. Primary reason is obviously we're trying to keep the size of events to a manageable level, to keep everyone's health and safety secured, and that's best done at the lodge level. Now, that isn't to say that when we hit the August timeframe, things have changed with regard to the pandemic. We certainly hope that's not the case. So I won't commit at this time, but I will say that it is our hope and intent that lodges will be performing these degrees.
Thank you, Most Worshipful. Brethren, I do not see any other questions forthcoming. So, Most Worshipful, I thank you for the honor and privilege of again hosting this event. And brethren who are out there in virtual world, I hope you found this event interesting and instructive. And now I will turn it over to our Grand Master for some closing remarks. Most Worshipful.
Well, thank you once again, Right Worshipful. You've done a fine job of managing this event. I want to thank the speakers for tonight. I thought tonight's program was excellent. It touched on quite a number of the pillars as a part of my Grand Master's message. Right Worshipful Brother Busby did a fantastic job launching his program of ritualistic excellence in the state. Right Worshipful Brother Akridge, and I should mention Brother Busby did this in concert with Right Worshipful Brother Tuttle. Right Worshipful Brother Akridge and Right Worshipful Brother Wolf are certainly doing a fantastic job of demonstrating leadership with our education committee. And you heard tonight some very specific examples that are going to lead to even more awareness amongst us in Freemasonry as time goes on. I want to thank Right Worshipful Brother Collins for reinforcing the message of making sure that we are Masons both within the walls of the lodge and without. People are watching. Brethren, always keep that in mind. You're a Mason regardless of where you are. And then we also heard about that through communication, and that was reinforced through our social media policy. I want to thank and really reinforce the message that we received from Right Worshipful Brother Collins. The charity fund drive response so far has been overwhelming. Given the situation that's taking place right now in our country, I was a bit concerned, not wanting brethren to extend their cable tow beyond what they should, given insecurities that are taking place financially in this country. But those who are able have certainly stepped up. And I want to echo the sentiments of our Deputy Grand Master in thanking each and every one of you for your contributions. I also want to thank those who plan to provide your support to the charity fund drive. It's not too late to do that. I would ask you at your earliest convenience to help as best you can within the length of your cable tow. Brethren, I will leave you with this. We're coming up on a very special holiday for our country, Independence Day. There's a lot of unrest in our country today, very unfortunate. And I think it reinforces the fact that this country needs Masonry more than ever before, because Masonry rises above. We take an oath and obligation to support the laws of our city, state, and nation. We make sure that we are respectful to our brethren and to our community. Respectful not only face to face, but via social media and all other means of communication. Brethren, I am so very proud of our fraternity. I'm proud of every single Freemason in the state of New Hampshire and throughout the globe. I want to thank our Grand Lodge line officers tonight for once again putting together a terrific program. I want to thank Right Worshipful Brother Newberry and Busby for helping to contribute logistically to make sure that this happens. And I again want to thank Right Worshipful Brothers Busby, Akridge, Collins, and Olson for doing a fantastic job of speaking to us tonight about items that I think are pertinent, informative, meaningful, and truly important to each and every one of us. So with that, brethren, I want to thank you so very much for a fantastic night. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in a lodge soon.